can you hear me well? All set up? Great. So thank you very much, Ellen, for the kind introduction. And hello to everybody here in the room today in Lisbon, and also hello to everybody connected remotely. I have to confess that this today is, for me personally, a very big honor to be here on this stage today, because when I joined the telecom industry just about 4 years ago, the TED Summit was one of the first and one of the best events for me to get myself educated on these huge trends of the APIs. So I have a very long history with this event for actually also onboarding me into the telecom industry. Where you've seen the trends converging all of those different communication services. And since then, TED Summit has been a very inspiring event for me. And as we heard before, I remember that back then, everything was about evangelization about this technology, the REST APIs. It was about convincing the industry, especially the carriers, that this is a game changer for everybody. And you needed to educate them on what makes them so powerful, how to correctly build them, and finally, of course, how to engage successfully in business with those. And today, 4 years later, we have witnessed so many success stories. A couple of them we heard today. Alan talked a lot of them that have been very successful from the participants here and from the sponsors, that you could assume that we have moved beyond the need for evangelization of programmable telecommunications and maybe even challenge its power, whether it is powerful enough to further disrupt this industry. And maybe you could start looking for the next thing that would be disruptive. But we at tyntec, we continue to believe that the next, and we know it, that the next things to come for this industry will all be continuously built on programmable telecommunications. And we'll be powered by that. But in that side, there are also a lot of open to-dos for this industry to tackle in order for us to actually truly unlock all of that potential and to fully leverage the value lying ahead of us. But before I get started, I know a couple of people in the room here, but not all of them. And I would actually like to get to know you a little bit more. So I would start some questions. And if you feel yourself you're being addressed or your company is being addressed, I would like to quickly raise your hand. Because I want to understand what sort of players, 3 years since my first visit to the TED Summit, we are now in the audience. I maybe start with some sort of classical definition of players. So I would be interested in who of you is actually working for a mobile operator, wireless carrier? Some are still present. Do we have some that are potentially representing any landline carriers already? No? One. Perfect. I think there is potential, Alan, to extend your audience into that direction a little bit further. Who's working for a VoIP provider? I see some. Messaging aggregator? Oh, is this some, or the same guys actually? Great. Who prevents a solution provider for an enterprise? Of whatever sort. Also, good share. What else we got here? Operator solution vendors? Still good, good, good. So there are many more, but I maybe now switch to a more adequate potential classification of players. So you may actually raise your hand again, although you have done it before. Who is representing a company that would consider himself providing communication solutions to enterprises utilizing programmable telecommunications? Okay, who of you is representing a company that would consider themselves a CPaaS provider or an API provider, providing offerings for these programmable telecommunications for the first group? Okay. And who is potentially representing a company that is providing telecommunications access to those platforms? So the last step in the chain? Yeah, the same guys that have potentially raised their hands at the very far beginning. So it's a very interesting picture here. I think the audience seems to shift a little bit since I was here the last time, because back then it was very much about old telco guys, and a lot of carriers were in there. But the amount of them have reduced, and now platform providers are the ones that are actually dominating these discussions. So what can you expect of me for the next 20 minutes? It will be very much about sharing some of our key insights for you to choose your role, the kind of player that you would like to be in the future in order to capture your piece of this huge value that comes with programmable telecommunications. And I will try to do this by sharing some examples with you of how mashups of multiple of the platforms that we all create, that we all have in our portfolios, are used today to facilitate seamless experience between either individual consumers directly or consumers and enterprises, consumers or customer and agents, and in enterprises and mobile workforces. To then take a look at some of the indications that we see in the market that might help us to answer the question to why CPaaS seems to be an almost infinite trend, followed by some things that maybe we need to worry about still, where we see potential stagnation that might threaten programmable telcos. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, we can, what can we do? What can we all do about it? The threats that we see ahead, and how can we derive real value out of that trend? And I would like to encourage all of you to potentially interrupt me during my talks if you have questions or comments, and I strongly encourage you to interrupt me when you disagree with something that I'm about to say. But first, for those who are not yet familiar with tyntec, we are running cloud communications platforms at the very heart of international enterprise communications, and we're going for our 15 years anniversary this month, actually. So whereas being an international tier 1 A2P provider for enterprise messaging for such a long time, we have seen a lot of hypes and trends come and go over the years, but nothing so far compares to the disruptiveness of the API trend. And on the other side, being also an interconnection provider for operator, we are also very familiar with their technicalities. And being right in the middle between enterprises on the one side and the operators on the other side is why we at tyntec are so excited about the current upswings and the successes that we referred to earlier by having one of the best quarters since the rise of CPaaS. So let's get us started. What do we mean when we talk about enterprise mashups, and especially CPaaS-powered enterprise mashups? So I would like to go back to one of the examples that we've seen in the showcases this morning, where you have a remote agent, let's call him Nick, that accesses his company's CRM system via a chatbot using, for example, his working channel is Skype. The agent then requests Jill Smith's mobile phone number or any other highly sensitive data, and as per security guidelines, the chatbot needs to verify Nick's authority and triggers a two-factor authentication through a one-time password via text. Once Nick confirms the right password to the chatbot, it accesses the CRM's database, looks up the contact information, and submits it to Nick. And for those who can read the numbers, we're actually now already at 4. He can then quickly, easily contact Jill and notify her about him being late or anything else. But you can immediately go further, right, than these steps, and you can think of that the interaction between the agent and the customer may actually also be run through a corporate platform hosted by CPaaS. Or you can even think about the bot notifying Jill just upon a request from Nick immediately, automatically. Or you can actually, if Jill cannot make it late and she needs to talk now, have the chatbot set up a WebRTC video chat room to engage immediately. And I could potentially get lost in describing all of the different scenarios that you can create around such a simple example as this one here. But if you actually now take a look at that and that process, and you take a peek behind the scenes and see what will you all find there, right? So you will find all different sorts of platforms. You find a CRM, a chatbot, natural language processing, you find an OTT, you find a telco platform. And all of these platforms, the multiple platforms, beautifully mashed up to a really nice service embedded into the natural workflow of the agent. Well, you can ask now, of course, okay, that's a nice example, it's a nice story, but what about the business behind that? Is it just a nice story to tell to convince people, or are those enterprise solutions based on mashups actually a scalable trend that we can benefit all from? And maybe some of the following indications might help you to build an opinion, or to allow us to build all of us an opinion on that one. The CPaaS, as it is today, I think is beyond its peak inflated expectations. So it's upon its rise to, and I would say we have a realistic view on what it actually can do and what it cannot, and where we need others to help us. Those platforms are on their way to a plateau of productivity. And just being on this way, and we already said that we don't know what the killer app is yet, but we know how to power that. We're just about to realize what great opportunities are out there if you combine the knowledge and the innovation power of the communities. And also potentially to give that into some numbers. CPaaS is growing 50% year over year, and not just trusting like consultancies or guys from IDC or stuff, but you actually, if you look into the reports of the companies that are in that space, they report on these growth rates in their books. So they're not just outlooks, they're already happening. And you have these growth in all different kinds of players, maybe small startups or post-IPO huge companies. And if it's not enough as a number, then just consider the $8 billion by 2019 in terms of a market size estimate. And this timing of CPaaS being in such a position of being actually capable of going to the space of productivity, this goes very well with the current shift that we see in the enterprise space. And when we take a look at their IT investments that are depicted to the right, for example, I don't know if you can see the diagram, but what is depicted there is how much they spend of their IT investments into different areas. It's led by almost half of the investment going to cloud services. And at number 5 is unified communications, collaboration, video, and contact centers, with still 1/3 of their investments going to that segment. So that enterprise is digital transformation. And their path that they are on, and the path that is described by their investments, is basically longing for such platforms like the CPaaS as tools to accelerate their progress on that path. So it's just a natural choice for them to go for APIs and external third-party platforms hosted in clouds. And this hand-in-hand journey surely has nurtured all different types of what you call a CPaaS provider. So if you try to somewhat put an evolution of CPaaS into a chart, if you dare to do so already, you might want to go with something like this. So you have at the top left the very flexible pure API platforms, the small events that quickly innovated, that addressed experimenters, that allowed you to quickly build up new services and start experimenting around. It was part of the first movers, and they created an inflated expectation that as if you could do anything, right? And right after that, quickly followed, you had the providers that already had some sort of telecom infrastructure in the back, something like VoIP provider, MVNO, XVNO, a rural carrier, or an aggregator with their infrastructures in there. And they were offering wholesale-like technical and commercial solutions to potentially allow the scale of the API platforms. But they then already, those guys, introduced a certain damper to the inflated expectations, as they have demonstrated that there are scaling limits from the telco side to one of those innovative use cases that they have created. And then, if you go to the current state of where we are now, you see also that you have the current generation of platforms which are now targeting the enterprises that have no telco experience, that potentially have business units that need to interact or configure things that don't have any dev experience or dev background. Basically meaning that there are providers that do not bring so much tech innovation, but they bring innovation in terms of how to correctly mesh up all of these different platforms and how to smartly embed them into existing business solutions and processes. And this is a use of APIs that is demonstrating a very efficient enterprise scaling way of their business. And in the midst of all these development of changes, of those terrific developments and promising opportunities, let us maybe take a pause and take a look at the other side of the market. Right now we have spoken about the enterprises, the consumers, where the investment money is coming from. But let's take a look at a little bit at the supply, right? So the access of the telecommunication services. Because the reality is that this access and how it is offered to this industry is not fully democratized. It's not yet fully opened up. I take the access to the mobile messaging as an example due to our history. And this picture tries to somewhat summarize the evolution of mobile messaging with a focus on North America. As of today, the telecom economics still force enterprises to go find their way through a jungle of obstacles. So whilst enterprises, as we said earlier, are actually being concerned about their own issues managing their digital transformation and moving from silos to cross-departmental business flows, we force them to figure out the nitty-gritty details of different access types. For messaging, these range from dedicated and vanity shortcodes, geographic long codes, mobile shortcodes, toll-free numbers, alphanumeric sender IDs, dynamic sender ID replacements, and even force them to understand concepts like proxy numbers, just to somewhat squeeze their innovation into the old schemes. And then we also ask them and want them to actually remember what each of these offerings are for, how they are used, and what you need to adhere to in terms of rules when you're utilizing them. And this is not yet touching the different business models behind them. The scheme that we have seen earlier for the CPaaS model on the left, that is one implementation way that Teletext has shown. There are 8 or 9 more, so you actually have to duplicate those tables, right? And then you see another advantage that CPaaS brings, because you don't have all these different business models potentially on a platform. You augment that. So all of these enterprises, whilst the telecom providers make that very, very difficult for them to guess on the actual performance of the telco services behind, they feel very strong friction trying to orchestrate the plurality of offerings that they are getting and the options that they're getting. And we believe that it's very big meaning for us all, for the ones that create the platforms, that it is our job to have them not to care about those things. So what does that mean? What do we have to change, or what do we have to provide to what we're currently doing to make it better for them? So we have to go one step further. So providing a lot of intermediary platforms in a two-sided market, our offerings need to adequately address and answer the evolving technical and commercial requirements for both sides simultaneously, not just the enterprise side, but also the access, the carrier side. So picture this two-sided market potentially something like this. You have a blue side representing a consumption side, enterprises, CPaaS player, and so on and so forth, requiring transparency, speed, scalability, and definitely simplicity. And then you have the orange side on the other side, who's concerned with completely different things, right? So they are concerned with revenues, control, security, regulatory compliances. So on the one side, what needs to change is we have to empower consumption side for the ease of use for their speedy implementation. We have to enable them for quick go-to-markets, as well as service level certainty, which they currently don't face. And you give that and provide it by transparency and scalability in order for them to flourish their communication use cases, bring in more and more revenue into this ecosystem. On the other side, the producers of access, for them, it will be imperative for all times to protect the trust that consumers have into the channels that they have built. Trust is a very big topic in a lot of discussions as of today. As well as you need to provide them with built-in mechanisms for spam protection, fraud prevention, and adhere to regulatory compliances. And I'm actually curious about this audience, as I believe a lot of you work with messaging channels as well, about the conversations you are currently having when you talk with your providers. What are the discussions you're having in this part? So I imagine that everybody of you sort of is discussing cost with their providers, right? If you want to use a channel, you discuss cost with that channel. I would be interested, how many of you have discussions when they have go-to-markets and roll-up plans for other country? Do you have discussions about regulatory complications and how to work around them? Anybody here that, yeah, there are some. I think more of them potentially don't want to tell that they have workarounds for regulatory compliances. But and there is another thing, and there's this threat of the OTT messaging that a lot of people talk about recently. Some are hoping that especially for messaging, maybe RCS will be a saving grace. You can think of it as whatever you want. But I think no one of you is actually having a conversation with their providers how they fundamentally dealing with the clash of cultures between how telco is doing business and the business models that are necessary for platforms. And this is where we come in and where we say this industry needs to address this. This industry needs to start democratizing the access to the telecommunications channels so that programmable telco can truly innovate and not just innovate and get scar tissue by realizing that if I take my innovation actually to market and want to scale, I get a bad user experience, but not because of my service, but because of the scalability of the platforms and the regulation and the business models behind that, behind the scenes. Because, and this is also something that unfortunately we are seeing in the line of RCS, that operators still, when it comes to commercial models, tied to their bilateral agreements, which are one-on-one agreements, which are contradicting concepts of platforms. So as long as those agreements cover the access, we haven't pushed platform thinking deep enough into the production side. And we believe it is our obligation to come up with solutions in order to solve those things. Yeah, please? Oh, 2 minutes. I will be fine, thanks. So for those players that come from the old categories, we have to change that. And operators are already starting to engage with aggregators to understand how to actually democratize that. So that was the original job of aggregators, to do that. But it's not good enough yet, especially not if you only have that in the light of RCS. Because Facebook Messenger, Skype, WhatsApp, and we have seen that, they're already opened up. They're not closed ecosystem anymore. They start giving their access to their ecosystems, to their products. You don't need potentially a Skype client anymore to interact or a Facebook client to interact as an enterprise. The consumers have that client, that's fine, or your agent or whatever. So to go through potentially through a proposal that we have done, how a democratized ecosystem could look like for messaging in the United States. In that picture, something that we have released recently, you see the two-sided market, carriers to the left, enterprises to the right. Both connected through the same public web page where they can create accounts or have dashboards, do web configuration and all of that sort, if they would like to, where they can register and create a verified account. So there is a central authority checking whether it's actually somebody that is in there. One is buying, the other one is selling. We know all these concepts from Airbnb platforms or eBay or even Uber and so on. The enterprise and the CPaaS provider then provision their phone numbers, which are essential for telecommunications, and say, okay, this is a phone number that I bought, and I want to utilize that for some sort of innovative use case and this description of what I want to do. The carriers provided the phone numbers are also having an account, and they get a notification. There is enterprise XYZ. They claim they have that phone number. Is that true or not? The carrier approves, yes, it's true. They bought it. They pay me. I'm good with it. Then you have also the wireless carriers where you would like to push the messages to. They also have an account, and they also get in their dashboard a notification telling them, okay, there is this enterprise wanting to use case XYZ. You have 1 week to disapprove if you don't like what they want to do with your mobile subscribers. But if they approve, of course, they get paid accordingly. And they publish their policies of what is allowed in their network and what would be the prices online. Like you know it from CPaaS. You have public price lists. You have the same rules for everybody. You do not start to discriminate people. And then all of that, what has been provisioned there, of course, can also be taken to an API layer. You don't need to have that configuration in a web service, right? If you find a solution provider that is creating your nice front end, just take the API layer of that. And then a very important piece is all of that contracts, all of that agreements get provisioned into a backend that is facilitating the transactions. You can think of current setups like the ICV setups or aggregation setups, but you might be even willing to experiment into new directions where you make a decentralized organization of transactions, potentially using blockchain like we have heard this morning too, or something else. So such an easy picture basically of a democratized ecosystem provides you with quick go-to-market, transparent work and message flows. It will foster definitely competition because everybody is allowed to join. And it will fuel innovation power for the industry without surprises if you want to go at scale. And it will put the carriers directly back into game. And now I use my last minute. I hope I have one left. At the end of my time to quickly conclude with 2 simple takeaway messages. One is that the efforts that we all spend, and the enterprises specifically, went into building computing over the last few decades are about to be rewarded at an enterprise scale, actually. So the information that they generated through decades of enterprise computing, operational transformation, are finally connecting with communications. And the communications ecosystem need to think beyond the small building blocks that we have provided so far in terms of APIs, because that's not enough for building enterprise skyscrapers. It would take careful orchestration of many different players across the ecosystem and across the platforms for beautiful mashups. And secondly, end users are the endpoint. And to make that happen at a global enterprise scale, we need to provide open and democratic access to them. And let the communication parties, the enterprises and end users, shape their experience as they desire it. And that is what CPaaS 2.0 is about, according to us. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if we have time for questions. No time for questions. But I will be around. You can grab me in the speaker's corner. So again, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marco.